Hello, everybody. Welcome to Raising Vibrations. You're with Simon today. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the embodiment of spirit, a Pluto in Virgo generation story. For a long time, for those of you that have been following me in different ways, you've heard me mention about the Pluto in Virgo video that I've been really excited to share, my investigations and my observations. And it's taken me quite a while to actually put this thing together, to be honest, for a couple of reasons. One of them, that the excitement or the sense of meaning that originated from when I was doing my investigations was deeply impactful on my own psyche. And I must admit, this video, putting it together, has been a kind of organization of my own thoughts and feelings and perceptions. And it's been a very healing experience for me, because it seemed to have had a very strong significance in my own personal journey. And I suppose maybe that's, on some deeper level why I'm really sharing this. I know that over the last 5 years of me trying to make sense of my own personal relationship to life and what my own personal inner journey is about, I've come across this Pluto and Virgo symbolism or meaning a couple of times. I wrote an article in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, called The Return of the Feminine, with the Pluto and Virgo generation story. And that was widely received. That was really, really, a lot of people really enjoyed that. I got a lot of emails from people saying that they had found great value in that, and it helped them make sense and organize their thoughts and what was their life about. And so I thought to myself a lot about this, and I've been paying a lot of attention to the subtle nuances where I've observed and seen this dynamic play out multiple times in families, in people's Pluto and Virgo's lives and their stories. And there's a very strong similarity in people's lives that are immensely diverse, meaning that I have observed Pluto and Virgos living all across the world, including where I'm living right now. And there's a very clear uniting theme that seems to arise out of your generation. And I've been curious about this fascination of my own towards it. And one of the reasons why I actually, found answers in this exploration that I want to share with you today is that my personal Mars and Venus sit at 16 degrees Virgo. And as you'll see when I bring up some charts in this video, the famous conjunction of Pluto and Uranus was within the range of 18 degrees Virgo and 15 degrees Virgo. Sort of many of you that have got Pluto-Uranus conjunction was taking place there at 15 degrees and 18 degrees Virgo. So they're kind of, that conjunction was happening on a very sensitive point in my own personal soul journey. And for those of you that know evolutionary astrology, that Mars and Venus actually squares my nodes. So exactly. So it seems like it's very influential on my sort of soul journey to understand the nature of what this conjunction was about and what the Pluto and Virgo story was about. And so, as I said, this video that I want to share with you today is not something revolutionary new. It's not something that hasn't been sort of in some way, shape or form presented in different ways through other people. It's not uncommon. It's not knowledge that's just but it's my observation of what is occurring within your generation and what seems to be the theme. And my value that I wish to share with you today as you listen to this is how this can help you make sense and organize your own process, your own personal life, and kind of leave an impression on you that helps you find meaning, which I think is a very sensitive and very painful place to go to. That sense of meaning, that sense of what has it all been about for me. And I don't mean it in a kind of narcissistic term like, oh, what about me? I mean more in a sense of, you guys have really struggled with this story of meaning and purpose and the role that you play and where do you belong. And my attempt today is to kind of show you the history of your journey over the last, um, 50 to 60 years, and, potentially also show you how this is something that actually goes beyond your age, that you carry in your soul memory. So the embodiment of spirit, a Pluto and Virgo generation. And just before any of you, leave because you're not part of this generation, I encourage you to watch this because it contains themes that are part of the Pluto and Scorpios, the part of the Pluto and Libras. I mentioned a little bit of Pluto and Leo in here. It's massively influential in the Pluto and Sagittarius. So this is not a video that's just specifically for Pluto and Virgos, but the emphasis is on to help you, leave this video and say, okay, it's not just all for nothing in that sense. All right. So something to consider when I chose this picture to illustrate the thumbnail. I was very meticulous about what its role was for the video, and the things that I want to highlight for you are very clear. Look at the detail of precision that needs to be sort of taken with things like this. Look at that over there. This is a Virgo theme, right? Detail. Look at the inner workings. This image spoke to me so deeply that this is part of your age. This is part of your storyline. And I invite you to consider that, we as a human race have been influenced deeply by truths and religious ideologies and perspectives that run through the Victorian era, through the time when England was traveling around the world, conquering and, putting its religion into different cultures, etc. Going back even before that, when you're looking at sort of the reality that we embodied as a human race and the way that we organize the civilization, that we've been very much concerned with and tried to manage and understand this relationship between life and death. Okay. And the inner workings of these two polarities that seem to be very strong in the human experience and in nature, right? There is an aspect of nature that has a very feminine receptive quality that is very much about nurture and the process of life, as you can see on this side. And then you can see that there is also the process of observation and deep meticulous analysis, and tries to observe reality as it is and to gain awareness from it, and to then use that awareness to be able to help us make progress in that way, so that we are able to move out of states of evolution that at one point were very empowering to us, but at another point can be now limiting. And so a very simple example that I can illustrate this is that in 1995 and onwards, the human race became aware of the progressive influence of technology. And so this started out as mobile telephones and stuff, and the intranet. And eventually by 2005, we started to actually see the emergence of this technological age start to come into our awareness. And now today, most of us can, even though there are arguments against what I'm about to say, most of us are living in a world where sending information to another person across the globe in a matter of seconds versus say 50 years ago, where it was all done through mail and there was time. So there's an interesting duality that sits here, where we are in a time where there is great evolutionary development in a specific direction, and that we are very aware of the outmoding of limitations that we once had, that were at some point the very nature of what we were able to understand as progression. And we're also aware of the things that are progressing us in new directions. And this is this kind of materialization of these two polarities that exist within our nature, which is a role of equality that is receptive, and a quality that is expansive or observation orientated, right? And again, deeply encoded in the cycle is the cycle of life and death. And for most Pluto and Scorpio, and Pluto and Virgos, your Neptune sits in Scorpio. And during the time when Neptune was in Scorpio, we were able to understand another aspect of DNA. This was something that materialized during Neptune and Scorpio's transit, DNA being a Scorpio dynamic, Neptune correlating to the transcendence of our limitations through piercing the veil of our separation, piercing the veil of our perceptions. And we were able to go deeper. We were able to go into more clarity around who we are. And this Neptune and Scorpio energy that the Pluto and Virgos hold, contains deep, profound symbolism that is associated with this balance of left and right, or yin yang, or as we would like to call it, masculine principle and feminine principle, receptive and observation orientated, and life and death and the cycle and what that means, and how we as a human race are at some very, very deep level, always grappling with the cycle of life and death and what it means to find balance between these two polarities. And what is the purpose of it? What is the purpose of my life? What is the purpose of my life before I die? Very profound philosophical questions that, we all come to on some level try to figure out. And your generation have been influenced deeply by a order that try to figure this question out, i.e. religion. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move over to something that I think is important to acknowledge and understand. It's when we go to the macrocosm. And so what you're looking at here is the sine wave, and this talks about the precession of equinoxes. And what we're actually just very, very briefly looking at is that here, let me just get my little marker to be a little bit thicker. Here you have where we are at the moment. And here you have BC Christ, and that's where we are. And for the last 2,000 years, we as a human race have been moving through this cycle. And the Pisces cycle, Virgo in Pluto and Virgo, the opposite sign of Virgo is Pisces, as you can see here, right? Neptune is transiting through Pisces at the moment. It's in opposition to all of the Pluto and Virgo's natal Plutos. There is an activation here. So this time that we're living in at the moment is speaking to the culmination of an entire evolutionary cycle that has lasted approximately 2,000 years. And the initiation of Pluto and Virgos manifests itself with a deep memory of when this cycle came in here and what it meant to actually live as a human race through this evolutionary pattern. And so what you're looking at here is that we have a global cycle, and this global cycle extends beyond our sense of individuality, our sense of ego. It's far more greater. And the age of Pisces, or the aeon of Pisces, has meant understanding life through symbolic interpretations and meaning and service and suffering. And so it would be natural that a order that allowed humanity to make sense of reality would come through something like religion, for instance, because the very sort of architecture of religious process has this idea of seeing a symbolic image in the sky as an example, and trying to find meaning through its representation in us, and also how we are in a constant cycle of being of service to something, and also being in a very awake state of suffering as a human race. Like, suffering and pain is not just something that is exclusive to one person. It's a worldwide universal phenomena that we all share on some level. We'll carry with us pain, and this age is coming to a close. And the Pluto and Virgos, that Uranus Pluto conjunction that took place in 1965 was the seeds for what would set in motion the fall. And the fall has to do with the logos, i.e. the logo of what represented order. And that fall must take place in order for the next age or aeon to become initiated. And so the next age is the age of Aquarius. It's the age of individuation, self-interest, technology. And so it's not about suffering and service and symbolic meaning and family and dynamics. It's about who am I and what is my storyline and who am I individually and what is my interests and how can I understand that. And it's about the advancement of technology, and Aquarius has to do with this, So here you have this transition that's taking place, and the connection between this transition has to do with that original imprint that was set in motion with Pluto and Uranus making a conjunction in Virgo. So this would kind of be a Western model of perceiving things, and this is more of the Vedas, the more Eastern philosophical observation of the same thing. And here we have 2012 as a switch between the Kali cycle, the Kali Yuga, as it were. These are called yugas. Yugas are ages, aeons, and we're switching into Dwapari, right? And so there is a transition that is taking place, and you, the Pluto and Virgos, are at the initiation or forefront in this energetic seed that is becoming impregnated into the collective psyche. And so it all began with this over here, this very profound imagery of a symbolic representation of order. And I really invite you all to understand and take time to really sense what I'm trying to put across here, because you can see this symbolic representation all over the place. And this is just a cultural reference that can resonate to some, but it doesn't mean that this is the totality. It doesn't mean that this type of symbolic representation, i.e. this is Christian in this way, it's exclusive to the Christian type of impression. But these symbols exist within other cultures as well. They just take on different forms, but they ultimately hold the same thing, which is, you have, again, the principle of the guide or the walking stick father dynamic, who had to, in a sense, show up as a principle of masculine. And when I say principle of masculine, I mean the archetype of protection and creating direction. And then the role of the yang principle, which was the birth process. And here you can see there is a birth cycle occurring. And the imagery here speaks to the focus of the middle person, which is the child. And the child represents, in this case, the Christ awareness or the Christ consciousness as it can be perceived. But what I'm really trying to highlight for everybody over here is that the ordering principle that has become the governance of our nature is held within this representation. The ordering principle that has governed our human nature, particularly to the Western mind and to the world that we have inherited, this symbolic representation is where it all began. And this is the age of Pisces initiation. And we can see two polarities of yin yang. And then what happens when you merge yin yang together? You have the one. And the one is singularity. And so as we come into this world with two symbols representing the formation of singularity, we're also coming into, or this is the initiation of it, as we conclude this age of Pisces dynamic, which will take, it's not just a day or a month or a year that it gets set in motion. It takes a couple of centuries in order for it to complete itself. But we're on the flux of it. We're in the closing cycle of it in a very intense way. And the singularity is forming itself as the internet. It's forming itself as the potential for AI, as an example, where there is no duality. There is no separation. It's just the relationship of one. And the unification of one can be perceived and seen as technology coming into our reality and dissolving the boundaries of separation. And this is what this is about. I was going to call this video the transmutation from separation, but I feel like the embodiment of spirit is an accurate representation of this as well, because what you've come to reveal to us, Pluto and Virgos, and this time of Neptune transiting over Pisces and opposing a Pluto, is the realization of separation. and then what that has caused. So this symbol showed up in our collective consciousness as a representation of the merging of two polarities. As Mary, for instance, had immaculate conception, it was this process of a union between anima animus, or polarities of feminine and masculine, or yin yang, as it were. So when I look at the chart over here, here's this conjunction that took place in between 1965 and 1967, this conjunction. And this represented the culmination, the closing cycle that would then lead to the new cycle. And the new cycle that we're experiencing is the liberation from this. This is the stepping into individuation and who am I versus being held into a collective script of ideology and religious understanding. The Neptune in Scorpio, what I find fascinating about this is that the spiritualization comes through the mutation or the transformation. So this is the embodiment of spirit, and the embodiment of spirit also as the transmutation of separation, the two sides that are separated. What I find really interesting when I was doing the work was the relationship of Chiron. So Chiron here sits conjunct Saturn in Pisces. And for most of you, Pluto and Virgos, you'll be hypersensitive to the wound that exists within authority, within the structural form that ultimately this divide process has left its mark on human relations. Meaning that Chiron came through at this time and it conjuncts Saturn and Neptune, and it reveals to me such a profound symbolic representation of the healing of separation. It is also revealing to us the wound of divide, Saturn. And it's showing the culmination cycle. It's revealing to us the closure of duality in the form of our psychic awareness and the realization of spirit, the realization of oneness, the realization of our ability to come into and see our own inner Godhead. And so the inner Godhead, when realized, becomes a natural breaking down of the existential God. And the existential God is what we're seeing today as a non-agreeance with governmental structures, or the failure to trust the governmental structures, or the realization of not being sovereign. And so most Pluto and Virgos, you'll know this inner rebelliousness in you, this inner necessity for wanting to break down norms that hold us in polarity, that don't see our unity. And unfortunately, one of the things that's very apparent and clear right now, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video and said it was very disturbing to me to put together, is because once I saw it in this clear light, I was like, oh my gosh. And it has to do with things like separation, loss of God, loss of meaning. And it has to do with the heart being chained between the division of these two polarities. And these two polarities, ultimately, we're talking about the split of order and chaos, the masculine, feminine, yin yang, science and meaning, right? Science and faith. You can just go onto the internet and you can go look at many debates between Christopher Hitchinson and somebody from the religious faith. You can go and look at many different types of conversations where one person's representing a more symbolic representation of life and the other person's representing more of a rational approach. And so these two polarities are interesting to me because both people are representing their side, but they don't see it as one and the same thing. And that illusion of separation leads us to extreme rational logical thought processes, lacks the quality of experiential understanding, which is more of the feminine quality, or a receptive quality, symbolic, inner, subtle nuance life. And the other side of it becomes too chaotic and becomes emotionally overwhelmed and is unable to put order to things, right? Put logic to things and gain structure. And so these two polarities, through the separation, manifested a deep existential void in so many of us. And this is what birthed the idea of religion. And so held within us was things like absence of meaning. Where is my purpose? And that all comes down to the heart. It comes down to being in your center. It comes down into resonance of true being. And these separated qualities, when we manifest from them, what we have is an us versus them complex. And that us versus them complex is what I think Chiron and Saturn's conjunction in Pisces is really trying to reveal to us as well, as we close the cycle, that there can be no individuation process if you're in a state of us versus them. There's an amazing video. It's only 6 minutes long, though, unfortunately, and interestingly enough, it's on a site called Science and Non-Duality, and it's a conference that they had, and you can go check it out on YouTube. And I'll actually post the link in it. It's only 6 minutes, but the actual conversation itself is longer. And it says, are we hardwired for us versus them? And I would say yes, on some level, because of the actual nervous system. We have a parasympathetic nervous system and we have a sympathetic nervous system. And these play roles within us to be able to interact biologically with nature. And so the interesting thing here to me that I observed was that when we are, as human beings, interacting with things that threaten us, right, our nervous system immediately interfaces with that and begins to perceive the threat as something that needs either a confrontation or it needs an aggressive stance, but it still keeps us in separation. And the parasympathetic just ultimately fawns into a state of not being able to interact with it because of a threat as well. And these can be perceived easily as, again, these two branches in our nervous system that are biologically hardwired in us. And so Robert Spalansky highlights this very interestingly. And there are many other ways of looking at the same thing, and that's what this video really highlights: is 4 people coming to the same realization from their own individual fields. And you can see how that we have a unique perspective on things and yet still come to this unifying understanding of separation, and how biologically right now we are very aware of what that manifests in ourselves. And you can see this in the internet. I mean, we manifested something called Facebook, which, at the time seemed like it was an amazing thing of connecting us globally and worldwide. And yet the dark side of it is that Facebook itself is not anything other than just pixels on the internet, but human nature gives it its animation, because we are the things that animate it, spirit, right? And so the manifestation of Facebook is nothing more than a reflection of our own inner psychological and emotional and biological evolution. And that's where the truth lies in this. And the Pluto and Virgos are at a stage in their human evolution from a collective perspective that are initiating the realizations of these things, and that what we need to do to culminate or find the way out. And that's why it's this embodiment of spirit, because once you are trapped in the duality of us versus them, or the separation dynamic, there is no way of actually coming out of it. You have to unify. So how did this unification take place? How did this loss, atheism, like loss of God, materialize? And well, it comes from this next slide. And what I want to do here is I just want to illustrate very quickly the unification process. So the age of Pisces initiates with the separation, and its intention is to culminate, right? To have this realization. And here's something interesting. Okay, according to Plato, there exists a mutual link between every person and the universe. This is a union of yin yang, which represents 2 oppositions. From the force of yang comes the heavenly part of the human soul. From the force of yin comes its earthly part. And so the emphasis that I wanted to put across here was the binding of the two as a inner force that exists within us, and we are trying to unify that. And the way that we're unifying it is by making a psychological attempt to see where our own inner polarity of yin yang is distorted, and to marriage that, right? So the Pluto and Virgos, your story is the awakening of this cycle. And what's interesting about this picture as well, from the painter, Vladimir Kush, who I'll put in the link, um, you know, he put this across because he talked about this inner space as our inner psyche, and that inside the inner psyche of the embodiment of spirit, we are able to actually create the Christian child. And I don't mean in the Christian child in religious means. I mean, in the picture I showed you, it was Christ awareness. It was the merging of our separation and the realization of our inner union. It's the realization of our inner Godhead. And so that we would, and the nature of going through that process would naturally lead to the fall of the existential God image that we have in us or have outside of ourselves. And this is the rejection process. This is the leading to atheism, as an example. It's the breaking down of the existential perception of an outer leading force, and we would become sovereign within ourselves. And this tree, this shell over here, speaks to the body, and encased in the body is this process of wanting to unify, right? Masculine and feminine principles trying to unify. And the tree, which was really interesting, and I love the little snail over here, was that life is a slow process of growth. The tree represents the ongoing cycle, that individuation, and the process of this union is a slow process that over time becomes integrated. And so our life story, our process of life, is something that comes deeply into its existence over time, and that the branch and the tree represents the consistent growing of this. It's very cool. It's very cool to evoke these energies into ourselves. So what I want to do here is I want to take this next step, and I want to illustrate to us the nature of what is essential to understand when making sense of these astrological transits. So I'm going to show you some slides of what has their story been and what's in your cellular memory. And then I'm going to bring some slides, some charts up, and I want to show you these really profound critical points that would show the astrology of the awakening. But in order to understand this, we need to be able to transcend our limited thinking. And what I mean by limited thinking is our relationship to that one life, but understanding the psyche and how the psyche works. And that there are multiple layers of expression and impressions held within our collective psyche. And that when we have aeons or ages move through us, themes arise out of those archetypes, and those themes become the thing that we process as a human race that's evolving us. And so, as I said, the Pluto and Virgos, you come in at a time where the theme is the progressive rejection of religious ideologies and perspectives, and the realization of spirit into matter, and then through that process, the illumination into individuation, true sovereignty, right? And so to be able to understand this, we need to understand the psyche. And this image captivates it so much because the psyche has multiple layers, it has multiple expressions, and that there is a force that's there that is ultimately, you know, the nature of our interpersonal relations. And there are multiple expressions of this. So Jung wrote it like this in a very brief way. He said, by psyche, I understand the totality of all psychic processes, conscious as well as unconscious. So the relationship to what you see here today is not just simply there as it is. It is an expression of unconscious dynamics that are very subtle and very nuanced, that are playing themselves out. And so what you see on the surface is a mere reflection of what's actually occurring at a deeper level. And that deeper level is where the archetypal mythology exists. Okay. So again, to kind of really put this across in a very profound way, what is the collective unconscious? And this is the reason why I'm focusing on the collective unconscious is here, is so that we understand that what we are interacting with in our reality at the moment is coming from a place that's beyond what our egos can sense and make aware to. That's why we can feel so overwhelmed as we try to digest the complexity of life at the moment. The culmination of this Pisces age is revealing to us everything that is held within this collective unconscious. And when you start to see it this way, you'll start to be able to then try to make sense of so much things happening at once, and how we are individually embodying these psychic impressions and experiences that we have all, as a human race, in our memory, lived through. Okay, and so right now, as we live in 2019, it is a what we are experiencing right now is the sort of growth of the original imprints that took place in, with Uranus and Pluto's conjunction in Virgo. Like, we're witnessing the collapse of the order, and that is manifesting from this deep unconscious symbolism that is held within that archetypal structure, and that it is speaking even deeper to the closing of the ages of Pisces, and this separation complex and duality complex. We're all trying to make sense of it. So the collective unconscious, so far as we can say anything about it at all, appears to consist of mythological motifs or primordial images, for which reason the myths of all the nations are its real exponents. And so we're all of us, so we're sitting at the top over here, right? We see feminism. And the question I want to ask is, why does that exist in our world? Why does the polarity of feminism exist as well, with sort of like extreme right wing? Why is there such a divide? Or why is, for instance, like Donald Trump holding our projections of our own unresolved and wounds and sufferings that we all experience? In 1991, for instance, if we had all seen him sort of on his TV show, we would have a specific sort of observation of his reality. But now, as the president of America, he becomes completely different. He metamorphosizes, not in his image, but in our image. And it's those timelines and the representation of his meaning that is really something that we've got to observe. And so every person and your relationship to reality is a reflection of the primordial image that is held within you. And your relationship to this thing and your biases towards these things are all there that need analysis. In other words, you need to ask yourself, what is this external representation of Donald Trump, for instance, revealing about my own inner personal psychological relationship to life? What are my judgments? What are my biases? What are my perceptions? And that's just one aspect. You can, like I said, you can look at the phenomena of Jordan Peterson, for instance. You can look at the phenomena of Cortez. You can just observe reality, and you can see all these really interesting things, and why we are so compelled at the moment to try to make order out of chaos, which is ultimately what's occurring here. And that's something that's really important to understand. And I'll get into it in terms of this idea of order and chaos, or involution and evolution. So, in fact, the whole of mythology could be taken as a sort of projection of the collective unconscious, right? This is highlighting here. So we can therefore study the collective unconscious in two ways, either in the mythology, right? What is the symbolic representation of our imaging that Donald Trump, for instance, is holding for America, or in the analysis of the individual, right? As we analyze our own inner relationship to this thing. And this yin-yang kind of approach, or this interplay between these two sides, gives us a very profound insight into the middle. And that's what the Christ consciousness was really about. It was insight into the marriage of these two polarities. That was really what this is about. That's embodiment of spirit. Here's another one that I want to highlight over here. And I love this so much, because now what I want to do is I want to show you, if you see the imagery of the field over here being the watery unconscious, and then what arises out of the watery unconscious, which is just exactly that. It's just watery unconscious. It has no bias. It has no intention. It doesn't have the psychological relationship to the perception of reality that we as human beings project onto it. It just is. That's like the natal chart, for instance. It is just symbols there. But once we interact with it, we animate it, anima. We give spirit to it. We give rise to it. And so when we give rise to something, we've always got to observe, what are we projecting into that thing that's rising, that is a reflection of our own inner psychological dynamic. And so I found this picture so incredibly touching, because it speaks to, on one level, the sort of downfall of a time in which the kind of very prominent masculine energy of awareness is reached its culmination. It reached its end cycle. It started with something and then it reaches its end. It's this life and death process. And for the most recent years of our psychological and emotional memory, the point here at the top of the spire is the domination dynamic. It's intent. And you'll look at most wars, for instance, will have this very spiked edge that leads us into control and into moving things. And it's sensitive, it's anti-life in that way. And yet it's also very progressive in the sense that it got us to the reality that we have here today, which is your home and your electricity and the car that you drive and the ability to read and the structure and the form that was put in place in order for the things that you as a human being can use to interact with this video. Think about it. We're very, very critical of the institutions and the roles that they play. And yet those institutions were the very reason as to why you can comprehend to a certain degree what's written on this thing here, how you can organize your day. You can write the articles you can write about the things that you hate. And so it's a very, very confrontational picture because it asks us to observe the motifs. And so this is the point here. The more one becomes aware of the contents of the personal unconscious, this here, the more is revealed of the rich layer of images and motifs that comprise the collective unconscious. And so, like I said again, as the fall of this time in which we had established this very sort of, structured, institutional, left brain orientated world, as it collapses back into the ocean and it holds within it the memories of what we have discovered about ourselves as a human race, it also speaks to how we are all, in a sense, very, very susceptible to that. As we flee it, we don't feel grounded. And this is something that's very profound, right? We're rootless. And as we are rootless during this time of collective shift, just as when you went through an individual experience in your life of change, you felt rootless in your experience. And so when the whole entire world goes through an experience of feeling rootless, how do you think we're going to feel stable? How do you think you're going to feel okay in structured form? You can't. So what's the antidote to chaos? It's order. What's the antidote to too much order? Well, it's involution, it's chaos, it's restructuring things. And so that's what we are. We're at this incredibly profound time in our human evolution in which the structure that once held the very image and motifs and the mythology of our existence is literally falling. And as we interact with that, we realize the contents of everything that has existed. And within that sense also comes the immense amount of feeling lost. And the only way out of this process really is to unify the inner and outer reality for yourself and to navigate what is individually true for you, which can be on and of itself an incredibly profound and disturbing experience, So here you have this picture in front of you here, and this is what I want to talk about. Everything that I've shared over here is to try and inspire you to see the reality as it is in terms of all of these different types of expressions that are arising. And my expression of this is one specific way. But I'm going to start here, and I want to take us on a journey of the original start that led to the separation and the necessity for order, and then the purpose of the Pluto and Virgos, because all of you come into this lifetime with one or two things. One, part of participating in some religious storyline, needing to break out of that storyline and break down all religious and ideologies that were held within the truths and the values of your family dynamics and what that's caused you. And those that rejected it and held the unconscious suffering and pain of those that couldn't do the same. Very important to understand about your purpose. Transmute that. Okay, so the split, the fall, the order, right? So here you have again Adam and Eve in the sense representing the Maiden Mary and sort of Joseph in that way, and then the Christ consciousness in the middle. It's just a different way of internalizing the same polarities of the heart center, the tree of knowledge, as it were, and the two polarities again, right? Wanting to merge. And then the Garden of Eden speaks to this point of complete bliss and ignorance. It's like we don't know our vulnerability. We don't know our true nature. And so the fall becomes this experience of becoming conscious. So Eve eats from the tree of life, as it were, and so it's tempted by the realization of our suffering and our duty and our responsibility to our own existence, and that's a heavy burden to carry, right? And that's what the women are. They are the realization to man that life is not just about moving around in different ways and being free spirited and just doing what you want. It's realizing that part of this journey of life is to go deep into your unconscious and to explore the inner workings of your psychological state in order to heal any um, dismembered or unresolved material that exists there. And so the feminine holds the space in order for that to grow. That's why the tree would be represented as ascension, but a tree cannot exist in earth unless it's rooted. And so the rooting process is the consistent breaking through of the dense material that is held within our psyche in order for us to ascend so that we can reap the rewards and the fruits of our labor. I mean, these truths are not just, haphazardly formed into the architecture of our psychology. It's there because it's representing the nature of our existence, right? But what has this caused? So Jeffrey Wolf Green talked about this in terms of the Garden of Eden myth, which was the spirit and being antagonistic to matter, and it was that spirit and matter were separated. And for 2,000 years, the ideology and the beliefs and the manifestations were that spirit and matter were not allowed to be of the same, and so the split and the inability to embody spirit was present. And so what materializes out of this is the heart that's encaged in the separation. And the separation is that Adam, in the representation of the man here, blames Eve for ultimately taking this tree of knowledge and making them conscious, which was the realization that woman, masculine, feminine, is making us conscious, and we are unconscious until we experience the feminine in that sense, and we are awakened, we're alivened. That's why the heart is ruled by the masculine and the root in the sense of the feminine. And the point here is that the story, that the mythology, the motif that separates these two becomes something where anger is the primary dealing factor for men at the moment. Anger, repressed anger. And the repressed anger comes from his disconnection. And disconnection from what? His disconnection from the feminine archetype, not females, the feminine archetype, nurture, and the ability to be held and to be, in order for him to cry, in order for him to come into his emotions, which is why you'll see in different forms, war has you have to separate your emotions. You can't go out in war and feel emotionally empathetic for the other person, because you'll die straight away. So war in and of itself is an illustration of a complete rejection of the feminine quality, because it means that if you were to embody any of the polarity in men, which is the anima, you would be able to sense that this is something deeply disturbing and destructive, and it doesn't bring anything other than more pain and suffering. So why would that be something we should do? There are better ways to apply the process of masculine dynamics. And so a great film to watch is the one called Gladiator, because you'll see at the end of the film, spoiler alert, he has this moment of reckoning. Well, the whole entire film is an illustration of this, but you should definitely go watch it and watch the lead's roles, realizations that he comes to. This disconnection and separation it's the void in him. So we, through a masculine world that is about, expression of going out and building things, it's trying to fill the inner void, and the inner void is the absence of meaning. It's the absence of coming into one's emotional reality. That's why you have the development of psychopathy and the inability for men to be able to, be sensitive to their children's needs, etc. And this is not all around, by the way. This is not even now. I'm talking the history. And so we have sadism. It's the application of being able to feel through hurting others. And the masochism part comes in where, because the woman is responsible for the fall, i.e., that she holds the guilt of tempting Adam into consciousness, she is guilty for this. And so she dooms herself to suffering. And the suffering becomes the process of a deep service to the masculine in a way that rejects her role as feminine, which is her anima or animus, which is her ability to actualize, her ability to find meaning in herself. And so these two polarities form themselves through Neptune in Scorpio as the Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Virgos. This is the realization of this polarity. And so all of you on some level embody this. And so again comes the masochism. I deserve to suffer. And so things like rape, for instance, would be a massive distortion of the masculine's inability to realize the boundaries being crossed and these types of things. And the feminine, on some level, being receptive to such distortions as a subconscious process of sadomasochistic dynamics that are playing out. And it's deeply embedded within our psychology that manifests itself through relationship complexes. And we're all at this point in time, with Chiron's transit over Saturn in Pisces at the time, how these things have formed themselves in different ways. And man, I could sit here for another like 3 hours just talking to you about this, but I'm so aware of the time that this could be taking in your life. So I'm going to move on, but I'm highlighting these things over here for you. What naturally happens in this sense is that you have the dominion over nature, right? And the dominion over nature then becomes what? It leads to things like nature is evil, right? Look what nature did to us, feminine, right? Yang in the sin. The great mother or versus the great nurturer. It's like it's all rejected. Spiders, snakes, earthquakes, death in these sense. And this again speaks to that very important theme of the video of the first slide that I showed you with the two people observing the cycle of life and death and nurture and protection and observation and sensitivity. And these are the themes that are trying to be unified. And here's the story. What you're observing here is me taking you along the story of how these things manifested itself. So the masculine in its role as a response to this becomes, it just puts this dominion over nature. And we start to take a more enlightened process of it. And we stop observing nature as the road to enlightenment or to awakening our consciousness. We don't see nature in its true form. And this doesn't mean that we're still doing it today, because when you look at like Leonardo da Vinci as an example, many of his drawings were observing nature. And it was a profound thing, because the insight, the prolific oracle insight that is imprinted in our collective psyche with somebody like Leonardo da Vinci, for instance, illustrates that the masculine observing the feminine, i.e. us, science observing nature and its truths in nature, leave deep, lasting imprints of truth into our collective society that withholds the stamp of time, because they are truths that are embodied within the architecture of our human understanding. It's we're just observing it, but we became better than that. And because we became better than that, we, over the dominion of nature and the crystallization of the feminine in this sense, we lost touch with what was essential. And this is a natural process. This is not something that we need to hold shame and rejection and guilt and this kind of nonsense with, because what does it do apart from just reveal your own inner pain towards something that you didn't have control over? Because on some level you inherited this world in which these dynamics were playing out long before 4 generations of your grandparents were born. It's nuts to think that you and me can begin to blame this thing as something that people have done. It's far more complex, it's far more subtly nuanced, and requires a unification of our history as this is what it was, and here's how we're going to move forward from it. That's important. All right. So of course, dominion over nature, what naturally manifests itself as an existential sky god, because why would we observe the earth itself as the very principle of our guiding understanding of our reality? We would see as the macrocosm. And this is a Virgo Pisces thing again: spirituality, Neptune, through unification, finding meaning, Neptune, Pisces, and of service to that, Pisces, right? And so this symbol, this imagery over here, I chose it specifically because of the night sky. It was like our human nature needed to find meaning. And so the cosmos seemed big. And instead of looking at the stars as the imprint of our individuation and the realization of that our destiny is held within the stars, like with astrology as an example, and that is the reflection of our inner self, we put one of these things in place. And this is the us versus them dynamic showing up in a different way, because this symbol represented to many, many, many people a place of home, a place of sanctuary, of safety, of community, of spirit. And think about it. Like when you go into a church, for instance, and people are singing, do people seem depressed when they're singing? Only the ones that are, in a sense, struggling with their relationship to this ideology. But for most, there is an animation. So you could feel spirit inside of this, even if it was to an existential being that ordered us. It was still the anima that was alive within the church. And so the cross and the symbol is held deeply within our psyche. It's imprinted there as this process of, and that we are all in service to this higher ordering form, because we needed the ordering form, because the logos, the logo, the masculine is order. It puts order to things. And so we try to make order out of chaos, which is the universe. I mean, think about it, right? Do you think that, why is it that we haven't been able to take, that it's not available to us right now to be able to take people into space, and for all of us to just go on a holiday? Like we book a plane ticket or a train ticket to go somewhere. Why can't we do that when we go into space? And the answer to this is very simple. It's chaos. There's too many things to take into consideration. And so we have to be able to manifest things that give us the opportunity to see life and order in a way that's more grounded in our more physical reality. And as a natural result, these two logos, these us versus them, materializes these imagery. And this imagery is what I was talking about, why I was talking about Jung and the expression of the collective unconscious, is because here you can see in a Star Wars film that just, cuts straight to our relationship to Adam and Eve, or to these two themes that hold values in our psyche, these polarities, right? So you have the Rebel Alliance, for instance, that's all about, the values that are held within Adam: be a good person, be nice to people, and so on and so forth. The rebellion, in that sense, the rebellion against something that is evil. And from the rebellion side, they're in opposition with something that is in opposite to their values. And the Galactic Empire, in this particular instance over here, is saying, well, we have opposition to your values. And so this is the complexity of our human race at the moment in time. The imagery is speaking to something deeper. And that thing that's deeper is our separation of these two logos, of these two imagery that is deeply held within our psyche, the us versus them, the polarities of indifference, and how do we find merging between the two? So like I said, the Star Wars film, for instance, you look at the Lord of the Rings, for instance, there's always polarities that through films that have great impact on the collective psyche are all revealing to us a deeper unconscious architecture. And this unconscious architecture through the Virgo Pisces age is what's here. And we're working through this. We're coming into the illumination of this. And this is the polarity of Pisces for all Pluto and Virgos, is the realization of this separation. And so what manifests itself is things like this, right? Here you can see the pointedness. Here you can see the burning of the destruction of the community, of the home, of the things that nurture. And all of this type of stuff is in the thing of things like us versus them complexes, or domination and control. All of this imagery speaks volumes to where we have been, and the manifestation of these two orders that hold different perceptions of the same thing, and how that's been separated. And just look at the detail over here. Look at the imagery of that over there. It's pointing upwards, right? It's looking for the homes being burnt. It's like everything that is the spirit, the church that holds the community together in its spirits, and the family and the children, those all decimated in that sense. And so there's rape and pillage and violation. But all of these men that are here are all also possessed by the Mars archetype, all possessed by the war, domination, control thing. And many of those men that were able to make sense of their separation wouldn't be sitting in this situation saying, oh, this is a good idea. You can't have the emotional or the nurture component integrated into your psyche and still have this materialize. It's not possible, because you wouldn't perceive this as sane. And so here again, we see the disconnect, and we are inheriting a world in which this is part of our memory. And the thing here that we need to understand is that when we manifest from this place, whether it be because we're wounded by it, we will never find unification. And the unification is held in these deeper truths that I'm trying to portray here. And so the Pluto and Virgos, you came into the world where you were initiating the realization of this. Okay. So I wanted to put across here just something that's really interesting: the two sides of the force, right? Here again, the same polarity is existing in different ways. It's like it's not just one specific ideology that sees it; it's universal. You know, you've got, like, for instance, Darth Vader representing the father of you know, assertiveness in that way, and then you've got like Yoda, for instance, the great sage, and you've got Luke Skywalker that's learning his path of understanding the confusingness of these two forces and his battle between which one is him. And this is a meme that just, you know, there's not a meme, but an imagery that came out. And follow this: followers of the unifying force philosophy believe that there is no light side or dark side, but only different ways of using the force. And that's the point. The force representing the unification of something that is inherent within our psyche, that represents two polarities through our human ego. But beyond that, transcending that, it becomes the realization that these two polarities are inherently within us, and that we can access each of them at any point in time when we need it. So sometimes you need to be more yin in a situation, sometimes you need to be more yang in a situation, but they are not separated in the sense. And when they're integrated fully, sometimes you need to use the force in the to get something through, and sometimes you need to be that sensitive person that, you know, understands things from a more feminine process, as an example. You know, and that's the point here. It's the followers of the unifying force philosophy believe that there is no light or dark side. This is a manifestation of the truth in which we are experiencing the embodiment of spirit, the transformation of from our separation. Let me just go back over here. So Pluto in Virgos, you come in here, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, it's this rising feminine process. And I want to try and put order to something. This is my internal process and sensitivity towards it, is that the logos, or the masculine and the yang in this sense, is the form of linear observation. So this is mathematical sequence of pi, right? The Fibonacci sequence, pardon me, not pi. And the Fibonacci is seen as it's in nature. It's like, I mean, this imagery just captivates the essence of the return of the feminine. It's that it's the realization of the observation of nature as the tool of awakening, and that's its role. And when we put these two together, we see reality in its holistic sense, and it illuminates us. It creates the third symbol of awakening, insight, as it were. And so it's coming back to a nature, not in the sense of going into nature and neglecting the masculine process. It's coming into nature and observing its process. What do trees have to teach us about ourselves? What do the migration of birds have to teach us about the cycles and the seasons, as an example? These are critical observations that are here present for us. And yet, through the polarity of these two things, the rising of the feminine and masculine thing, or feminine, becomes massively distorted, man. And it's really scary to see, because when we are not, like Jung was talking about, when we're not observing our inner motifs and psychological and emotional archetypes coming through to us, it's not possible to make sense of. And we can be possessed by our own prejudices and biases towards things and project them onto reality. And what all the internet is doing is just reflecting to your own inner psychological nature. And that's the singularity. The singularity is that whatever you put on there, it just becomes a reflection of your own inner process. And that there is no inner Godhead or external Godhead or authority. Some person's journey can be completely different to another. And who are you to give the authority of yourself to another person? It just doesn't work. And so one of the things that's important here is to observe our nature, to observe our inner psychological nature, and to traverse that trajectory. And this is the point of the Pluto in Sagittarius. The intention of the Pluto in Sagittarius is to come into reality and see this as the return to nature and to observe it. And this imagery here, I've spoken about it before, but its purpose is to just illustrate that the Pluto in Virgo is coming into a time where the fall of the civilization is materialized, the old symbolic representation of death in that sense, and the order that was once held at the top that we needed to ascend to in order to get to that place is no longer there. You know, the sanctuary or the church, as it were, that once held the spirit or the anima is now dead. And in that process lurks in the chasms of the repression. What lurks inside over there is all of the shadow of what was held within this construct. And what is held in the construct over there can easily be perceived as a projection. And the projection is, oh, this separation is responsible. The masculine is responsible for it. The masculine and the feminine are all experiencing the same thing in different ways. The masculine came into this world and said, okay, well, the men came into this world and they embodied the masculine principle. And so their role within the societal context that was from a more hierarchical place said, you will go to war. And some men said, why the hell do I want to go to war? That seems like it's retarded and stupid. And yet they were forced to. And so they have this very, very deep sensitivity to their will being used in a way that they never got to choose. I don't want to do that. But I'm forced to do it. Otherwise, I'm going to be sent to jail for treasonry because I'm not using my nation's, like I'm not being, following the collective ideology of the nation's will, as it were. And the feminine just gets left at home. And both sides got affected by World War II. Nobody came out the other side of it and said, oh, you benefit from this mode. That's bullshit. What came out of it was that both of us, we are both wounded in this sense. And when we recognize that there are no separations, but woundings on each side that hold different expressions of the same universal experience, we will find unity in that, because you can't heal the one without the other. They need to be there. And so it comes back to that picture again of in the man, he needs to come into contact with his anger, his pain, where he didn't know that he had this choice, and that he was put against these things, and his separation from his feminine, his anima, his capacity to feel in this sense. And the woman, her inability and the repression of her animus, which was the ability to follow her dreams and to find out what her purpose is and to really live in that way. And these are two healthy polarities that must be integrated at this point in time. So her suffering of her isolation in that sense. Okay. So part of my journey of exploring this, which actually initiated itself in the beginning of this year, was these two people, Friedrich Nietzsche and Karl Marx. And what was really fascinating to me is that Karl Marx had a Pluto 12th house and Friedrich Nietzsche has a Pluto 1st house, right? Now, notice the interesting symbolism over here. Chiron, Saturn conjunction in Pisces, okay? South node in Scorpio at 8 degrees, North node in Taurus, right? Here's this person that comes into this world, and what does he write about? He is all helping the people that are less fortunate. He's helping the people in a Piscean way. He's revealing where there is a disturbance between the us versus them complex, and he's trying to illustrate to us that there is a kind of dynamic between two like hierarchies where people that are less off are suffering, Pisces, and there's a wounding over there. And that we need to try on some level, and this is not his word specifically, but ultimately he is trying on some level to say this, that there is a necessity for realizing these dynamics and that it's important. Karl Marx, for instance, and Marxism and neo-Marxism as well, tried to be as a ideology put in place through our human existence later on after his death, and it became something really, really intensely horrific for us. And so the point here with this symbolism and what actually triggered off these two people is that one holds the yin kind of process. And Nietzsche, for instance, when you read his work, and he's very yang in his process, man. He's very first house Pluto. He's very like, and you can see the manifestation of Nietzsche's ideologies and truth manifest through something like, what's the word? Hitler. right, who just decimated people because he felt like the race needed to be cleansed. And that's that first house process of his ideology wanting to superiority. And then you see here in the Marxism process, in which you get ideologies like Pol Pot, for instance, or Stalin, that just created communism that just went down the tubes because it was just horrible. We as a human race took these like hierarchical father figures, as it were, decided to be power hungry and just go into a country and try and run it through these ideologies, and failed miserably. It caused this tremendous amount of suffering and pain. And what I find interesting about these two is that they've got a lot of Sagittarius energy, right? They also make connections to the collective nodes. Nietzsche, for instance, had a very detached process of breaking away from religious ideologies and perspectives in that sense. You can also see the Jupiter and Pisces dynamic over there. His wisdom came through, God is dead, as an example. And then you have something like Nietzsche, for instance, that wrote, Marxism, that wrote books that affected the collective psyche on ideologies and perspectives. And he also had a really interesting influence and both of them had interesting influences in their books. And the interesting thing here is that both of these people, born in Germany, coming out of a place that very much had to do with the Pluto and Virgos, because again, he has this Pisces energy, right? Polarity point. As the Sagittarius, Pluto and Virgos have their Pluto and Uranus over here, and it's connecting to it, it's squaring that. And these energies, these transpersonal planets over here, they have memory in them because they are shaped. These people were connecting to the deep psychological impressions of the collective psyche, and their impressions left incredible things, memories on our process. And both of them on some level represent the kind of duality that we're facing at the moment. One of them with extreme atheism and the neglect for the realization of mythology as an important process of awakening spirit in us. And the other person that revealed to us that things happen in cycles, Neptune, Pisces, cycles, and that we need to understand these cycles. But we also need to understand that there's a very clear divide of us versus them and how that affects people, Okay. So I've drawn some charts up because I wanted to show the Pluto and Virgo's connection between different stages of evolution. Like in this case, for instance, I want to show you the Pluto in Scorpio generation, born between 1984 to 1995. During the Pluto and Scorpio generation, you have a very interesting relationship to the Pluto and Virgos, meaning you have an interesting relationship to this process of the fall. And this is the Pluto and Virgos, the fall of the old world that held this symbolic representation of the father and its values in that, and the collapse of that. That's what you initiated. So you're coming into this world and you're perceiving the collapse of this old thing, and you're saying, what is my meaning? And I'm saying to you that everything that is held of the past, you are embodying the things that were really, really terrible about it, but you're also embodying the things that were really, really, that we got from that, and you're unifying them. And so you have the Pluto and Scorpios come on, and look where the Pluto lands, right? The Pluto and Scorpios land here, and they land on the Neptune of the Pluto and Virgos. There's a connection between the two. Your Pluto's moved across it. So you have this, your social realization, like the fact that you're coming into this reality where, in 2009 or 2019, you're witnessing trying to get student debt, as an example, right? A hierarchy that valued certain things, and student debt became a kind of like a process of being unable to get into the world and make something for yourself. So this old world and its structures and its values no longer worked. And you are connected to this process. Just as an example, you're connected to this process of what does transformation take place. Now, most of you, Pluto in Scorpios, you'll realize that there is a necessity for transformation in you. That's why somebody like Jordan Peterson, for instance, who's a Pluto in Virgo, who has that conjunction, Uranus and Pluto in his third house, comes into the world, and all of a sudden, who's the people that he meets the most, in the sense of who meets his message the most? It's the Pluto and Scorpios going, oh my God, I needed to make order out of my life because it was chaos. And the thing that I needed to understand is through self-responsibility. Look at the symbolism. Look at the symbolism, self-responsibility, Nietzsche. He came into this, he was like, take responsibility for your life in that sense, because if you're not going to do that, you won't be able to individuate yourself, as an example. Just one of the things he talks about. Look at the outer conjunction. Neptune, Uranus conjunction in Capricorn, and the North Node's there at the exact time that Pluto transits over the Pluto and Virgo's Neptune, right? And then there's a beautiful trine. Look at the beautiful trine. Pluto trining the Pluto and Virgo's Saturn and Chiron. These generations are interfacing with each other. And the connection I'm trying to reveal to you, which can be very difficult in the chart, is that these symbols are not, they're not in the moment. They are spread across time in the collective unconscious. That was the reference to the collective unconscious stuff, is that as generations come into form, and the transits that they experience will impact the previous generation's transits, and those transits will reflect in awakening experiences, and collectively we all experience different themes that all ultimately are a result of a progression. And that progression is, in this particular case, the culmination of the age of Pisces, and the meaning and the transition from symbolic meaning and service and suffering to individuation, self-interest, self-responsibility, taking charge of your life, finding order in your life, and most importantly, transmutation. To literally go into the depths of your own psyche, to order things around so that you can come out into the world and find meaning in your own inner Godhead, the meaning of your own life. And so this North Node also speaks deeply to the process of the Pluto and Scorpios coming into the world, in which the collapse and the breaking down and the dissolving of the old world is there, North Node. And look at the symbolic representation of Uranus and Neptune. So the Pluto and Scorpios, most of them have a trine to Saturn and Chiron in Pisces, and it's conjunct their Neptune. And most of the Pluto and Virgos will have Neptune, or will have Pluto trining the Neptune of the Pluto and Scorpios. There's a collective experience here. And then you have Saturn in Aquarius opposing Chiron in Leo, right? Leo Aquarius archetypes. And these Leo Aquarius archetypes are about self-individuation. So we're literally witnessing the transits that activated and set in motion the breaking of the fall. This is what you're looking at here, is this, is that. That's what you're looking at in this chart. And here's another one, 18th of October, 1993. Look at the conjunctions here, right? Pluto's moved along now all of a sudden. Pluto's now 24 degrees, so it's not necessarily affecting it. But here's the Uranus conjunction again, still sitting there. 18th of October, 1965, when that conjunction took place. Yeah, you've got the South nodes, right? 1993, you've got the South node, or the North node conjuncting the South node. So yeah, you have a complete symbolic representation of the old and the new, the old cycle and the new cycle being colliding. And as they collide, they make the fusing of what we experience today as Pluto and Scorpios, for example, hyper socially aware of all of the things that are existing, and the necessity for, coming into our belief systems, Sagittarius, and the old belief systems and the new belief systems. So Pluto and Scorpio is going, I didn't grow up with religion, even though to a certain degree there was religious influence, but that was from my parents, mostly Pluto and Virgos. But this is not something that's not my religion. My religion is my own emotional dynamic, my own transmutation process. So many of these things are so relevant and real here. And unfortunately, I wish I could do a better job at capturing imagination, but these are the transits that were occurring, significant events. Here's another Pluto and Scorpio conjunction, right? There are many others that take place. Like for instance, with me, I'm born 1983, and my Mars and Venus literally land here on top of that Uranus-Pluto conjunction, right? There's many different symbolisms that speak to it. But look at this. Chiron is now in opposition. Chiron is in opposition to the natal Chiron of the Pluto in Virgos, but it's in Virgo, it's opposing the Uranus-Pluto contact, and it's about to make connection to this. Saturn, here's Saturn coming to a closing cycle. So 30 years on, Saturn comes into Pisces and makes a connection to the Saturn over there. So most Pluto and Virgos who have got Saturn in Pisces, most of you won't, or most of you, all of you won't actually have Saturn in Pisces, by the way. So it's speaking to a very specific era. You'll have this conjunction. So Chiron makes an opposition. You're having a Chiron opposition at the time that Saturn comes into Pisces again and reveals the culmination of the first cycle. And look where the North Node is. The North Node is traversing your Neptune again. It's just like all of these symbols, all of these transits that you were going through, and when the Pluto and Scorpios were being born, they hold it. The Pluto and Scorpio generation, you hold, these people that were born now, you hold within you the next phase of it. You hold the archetypes of this expression. So to the Pluto and Virgos, this was a transit for you that was illuminating these things. But the Pluto and Scorpios came in, and this is your life. And the two separate things are, one, you are growing into what will ultimately become the world you see today, Pluto and Virgos. And the Scorpios, you are born at a time in which the initiation of those cycles will lead to what you see in the world today. And both of you sit in a place, interestingly enough, with the Pluto and Libras in the middle, going, what is the meaning of my existence and where do I belong and how do I fit into society? And it seems like it's mad and chaotic and there's no purpose. And it's just, how do I find meaning? I'm at a loss of meaning. Both of you sit with this process. And it's just different generations, and it's in some sense the same thing. And the meaning is, the Pluto and Virgos came along and said, okay, well, how do I find spirit in matter? And the ideology was through religion. The Pluto and Scorpios come in and say, how do I find spirits in matter? But the ideology is coming into my sense of purpose and meaning individually, and to awaken my individual process, and that to break down the logos. And the fall of the father, for instance, is primarily what you guys experienced. The father archetype and the mother archetype weren't there for you. And so now how do you navigate your world? The symbolism is gone. And so now what you're seeing in the world today is the absence of the symbolism and the distortions that come from that were repressed. That's what this Neptune-Uranus conjunction was all about. Because now we have Pluto there. Pluto is literally there at the moment today as we're doing this. And it's awakening this collective social unrest that is present with us at the moment, and how these two, how are we trying to make order out of things that are chaotic? Pluto and Sagittarius, though, right? It's not Pluto and Scorpio. 2000s, right? This is the onset of the 2000s. Here you have Chiron conjunct Pluto, right? This is the onset of climate change issues. And here's Uranus and Neptune in Aquarius now. It's the onset of technology. The paranoia and the psychological trauma associated with our stratosphere and our climate, Aquarius. Yeah, you can have, again, South Node in Capricorn, North Node in Cancer for the Pluto in Sagittarius generation. And we're looking at this, how do we integrate into society? What is the purpose of this? Here's Pluto and Chiron, as I said, again, coming in, and that would have, this South Node that's here for the Pluto in Virgos, that South Node that sits there, those two symbols would have crossed it already. And that would have set in motion what? What's being set in motion with the difference between the Pluto and Virgos and the Pluto and Sagittarius is that we live in a world right now at a collective level where we're disjointed. That's what I mean. We're rootless. So it's like, where do we belong? Who are we? What are our values? What are the things that we hold as the collective truth? You know, what's real? What's not real? Can you trust a image that's been sent on the internet? So the Pluto in Sagittarius is, you're coming into the world and you're inheriting something in which there is collective information all over the place, and we need to know what's true and what's not. And the only way to know that is to be able to know what your own personal truth is. And that personal truth comes through your own faith. And so the rejection of the faith, because they are aware of all of these religious wars that are taking place, have disjointed them, loss of the family, loss of the community. And so now it becomes a global family. You find your family in the globe, in the world. So my conclusion today in this conversation is that Pluto and Capricorn helps us process the material that was brought to the surface in all of these, in this opposition. Pluto and Capricorn is revealing to us our history, our nature, the unconscious, and it's all coming to the surface. And what's coming to the surface is the fall and what that means for us and how it is necessary right now to make sense of our reality through organizing it. And the only way to make sense of it and to organize it is to take your attention and your awareness out of the field of the existential world, because it is a collection of the societal projections of our unresolved material. And you will never find your truth existentially. And as long as you realize that, you'll come into embodying your own spirit, which is the awakening of your own logos. And the only way to do that is to transform. So you need a symbol to replace the old one. You need a new order, a new logos. You need a guiding principle. And like I said, that's why things like Peterson, Joe Rogan, for instance, Richard Rudd, human design, all of these types of things, the blowing up of Cleopatra on internet, astrologers on the internet, because everybody's seeking order. And that order is the guiding principle. And what we've got to realize here is that the only way to organize this is to come into your own work and your own transformation of your own inner feminine process. And the connection between the Pluto and Sag and the Pluto and Virgos is what is true, what is natural, the crisis in belief, the divide and separation. And so we're coming into the embodiment of spirit. And the embodiment of spirit is the union between our inner self and our outer self, because we are connected. And the illusion of separation has led us to this. Thank you very much for letting me take this time to talk to you today about this. I really hope that on some level it provided value and sense to you. This is my best attempt. I think I've recorded this video about 6 times, and thanks very much for listening, everybody. And I would really, really love to hear your thoughts and your comments in the description below. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.